You know, we've covered a lot of stuff this month so far, a wide range of horror topics, a whole different variety of tones and vibes, but one thing we haven't done is cover a film in the spirit of the very first Wholesome Halloween. A horror film that gives your heart a little cuddle in amongst all of the murders. And if this is going to be the last of these marathons we go through, we should really pay tribute to the OG. So today, in the spirit of that original Wholesome Halloween we started all those years back, we're going to cover a truly wholesome horror movie. Get duked. Get Duked is a hilarious horror comedy that is maybe the most British film there is. Yeah, that's right. It ain't Pride and Prejudice, it ain't Notting Hill or The King's Speech. It ain't about none of that fancy, farcy British crap. This is proper British. Packet of crisps in a tinny from the corner shop British. EastEnders with your mum on a Tuesday night British. Kebab at 2 in the morning when you're off your nips British. Beautiful British film. And the reason for that is it deals with two completely quintessential aspects of British culture coming together in joyously perfect harmony. Chavs and the Duke of Edinburgh Award. So for those of you outside the bubble of our little evil empire, Chavs are... how do I explain this one? There is this negative stereotype of working class people, usually but not always youths, and usually signified by the tucking of their tracksuit bottoms into their socks and some form of Burberry somewhere on their person. It's really just a term to demonise the working classes. Good book on that subject, literally just called Chavs. But purely stereotypically speaking, they're sort of like the English council estate equivalent of the kind of people Americans might refer to as rednecks, trailer trash and yokels. But with a little sprinkle of AEW's MGF mixed in there if he were poor. And whereas the redneck stereotype is obsessed with, I don't know, shotguns, cheap beer and the flag, Chavs are instead into antisocial behaviour like underage drinking, racing crap cars and punching your nan. Again though, this is a stereotype. Live in a council house long enough like I did growing up and you certainly know where the caricature has come from, but it is very important to note that not all poor people who grow up in England on council estates and in rough areas are thuggish louts. Speaking personally, I have never punched my nan, even once. She's a lovely lady, wouldn't dream of it. And then we have the Duke of Edinburgh Award. Oh man, how do I explain this one? It's like this ridiculous overlong child torture method, we'll call it, where when you're in secondary school, which is like late middle school to high school for all my American viewers, you'll have this big special assembly where all of the students get gathered up and a bunch of people come in and tell you that you really want to do the Duke of Edinburgh Award because it's so cool and you get to go on a big adventurous holiday with all your mates and it'll be super amazing and look amazing to future employers, and basically if you don't do it, you're a worthless idiot and you'll never amount to anything, and anytime you apply for a job, you better pray that nobody else applies who has Duke of Edinburgh Award winner on their CV, because they are the most in-demand people in the world. They're going to be the next global leaders. They're going to be the top scientists at NASA. They're going to get access to the most advanced labs on the planet and cure cancer in an afternoon, all on the strength of this endorsement they get from what's just a fun little holiday in the name of the country's prince. So why would you be so stupid as to not do it? Spoilers, dear viewers, it is not a fun holiday. No, in fact what it is some kind of bizarre British Squid Games bullshit where you take on a variety of increasingly difficult tasks and hope you come out the other end still mentally intact. At first it's like community service with a strange skills test latched on. You have to prove you've carried out a certain number of hours volunteering and doing physical activity, and then you have to develop a random skill like learning to play an instrument, or the example they gave on the website I found is learning how to care for horses. God, you can tell this was run by a bunch of posh twats. And then, at the end of each tier, you are eventually dumped in a random ass field in the middle of nowhere with a paper map and a compass and told to hike several miles without guidance to a targeted point in a set period of time. And you just gotta hope you survive all that. Yeah, people have actually died doing this. A couple of Duke of Edinburgh websites say nobody has, but they have. Not many maybe. but they have. In fact, one time, Prince Edward, the current Duke of Edinburgh, and son to Prince Philip, the previous Duke of Edinburgh who founded the award, was asked by a reporter about a kid who had died on it in Australia after they made the award programme an international thing, and he was like, really? Shit, man. I didn't know about that. But kinda sick, really, because the last time a kid died doing this, it actually got more popular. So, silver linings. God, I wish I was making that up. The logic of the award is that it's supposed to build confidence, leadership, character, and discipline. The bloody military school logic. But that's just not what it does at all. Everyone I know who did it who was nice going in came out just as nice. And everyone I know who did it who was a dickhead came out the other end, still a dickhead. The only thing that had changed about any of them is that some had minor to serious injuries, and all of them now passionately hated the Duke of Edinburgh. And it goes on for literally years as well. There's levels of increasing difficulty in tiers of awards labelled bronze, silver, and gold. And I think gold runs for like 18 months or something. Bronze and silver has 4 sections to complete and gold has 5, each one having one of those sections be these unsupervised expeditions with no phone use allowed and always on a bigger scale than the last tier, with the gold expedition being a minimum outing of a practice journey of 2 days and 2 nights, followed by a full expedition of a minimum of 4 days and 3 nights that must, by the conditions of the award, take place in unfamiliar wild country. Not to mention, you then have to deliver a presentation on the misery you've just endured. And of course, if you don't go all the way to winning gold, then what are you even bothering for? Was the general sentiment seemingly of all the people who ran it. I personally know people whose assessors on this thing told them that getting the Duke of Edinburgh award was more important than their success in school or college. And the saddest part of all of this is, of course, nobody gives a flying fuck if you have a Duke of Edinburgh award on your CV. Not a soul on this planet. In fact, they care so little, they're never gonna check. You can just lie. For all you know, I'm a Duke of Edinburgh Platinum Award winner, mate. I've never even been outside, never mind on any of that bullshit. And you know what? I can write Duke of Edinburgh Award winner on my resume the same as anyone else. We're all Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award winners. Just write that you are. It's as good as being one. You get a gold award, you get a gold award, everybody gets gold awards. God, of course the English of all people invented something so needlessly complicated, long and drawn out with no tangible benefit at the end of it all. It's basically the Houses of Parliament in hake form. Such bloody wrongins. But on the other hand, a terrible, long, potentially dangerous trek carried out by children all alone in an unfamiliar place and ill-equipped to handle it? Good ass setting for a horror movie, you gotta give them that. And then, if we make these children the kind of stereotype of a yobby British working class kid that's written off by a lot of society as a waste of space, well then you've also got a platform on which to examine and dissect that stereotype, while setting up a narrative world in which your protagonists are instantly mistrusted by the country at large and any potential help they could receive, raising the stakes of their situation should someone come along with a particular distaste for their class of people, all the while giving yourself the opportunity to wrap the whole thing in really funny examinations of the inherent daftness of this working class British culture, by delivering humorous observations in a tone of voice familiar to anyone who's ever been to an English public school. And damn! Guess what? Get Duke gives you all that in a bag of crisps. Written and directed by Ninian Doff in his first feature effort, the film follows 3 bad students, a trio of friends called Dean, Duncan, and a lad who calls himself DJ Beetroot, who get carted off to the Scottish Highlands by their teacher, Mr. Carlyle, to try and achieve their Duke of Edinburgh award as a means of disciplining them for their continued bad behaviour. All of them resent being there, but they're joined by a 4th student who is actually pretty into it, a young lad called Ian, who is taking the opportunity to improve his college application. Sorry to tell you, Ian, that's a total lie, and this will not do anything for you. Anyway, the lads get given instructions to meet their teacher back at the base camp before being left on their own and expected to work out how to find it. The lads set out with all but Ian being miserable at the current state of affairs, though they do get a little happier when Dean pulls out a secret stash of hash, something that Ian isn't particularly thrilled about. As all but Ian enjoy a bit of the naughty grass, a mysterious figure watches them in the distance through a rifle scope. As they continue their adventure, they eventually find the person who was watching watching them, a fella in posh hunting gear who stands ominously in the distance. They approach him to ask for directions and help, only to realise he's wearing a creepy mask, one Ninian actually modelled on the original Duke of Edinburgh, and be met with him opening fire on them. Barely making it out with their lives, the boys decide this must be the Duke of Edinburgh, the final boss of their current quest, and as their trek continues, they discover their would-be killer has assistance in the form of an equally dangerous partner, a sword-wielding woman in a just as creepy mask dubbed the Duchess. Meanwhile, local police sergeant Morag and PC Hamish, who live in such a quiet area that the top priority of their investigations right now is to catch a bread thief, suddenly find themselves chasing a potential big case when they get wind of the battle between the boys and the Duke and the Duchess. And not knowing the full story and thinking they have some kind of act of terrorism on their hand, they become hot on the boys' tails too. So between the fuzz and the fanciful furies, the boys must rely on their wits and each other in order to escape the law and certain death, as their friendships are tested and strengthened, the value of their lives questioned, and their food and supplies run low. Where do I even start with analysing Get Duked? So the first and most obvious thing about it is it's really, really funny. Like, if you get it, and it may be that not everyone does, it feels like a very culturally British piece, but if you do, it is hilarious. Like, oh my god, I cannot remember the last time I watched a film with a smile this wide. I was buckled with joy at this thing. Carried by exceptional writing and performances, it's filled with a kind of bouncy, jovial joy that's so distractingly funny, you might even miss the fact that it's as visually and thematically creative as it is hysterical. The four main lads, Ryan Gordon as Dean, Lewis Gribben as Duncan, Viraj Juneja as DJ Beetroot, and Samuel Bottomley as Ian, all absolutely kill it in their roles and bring to life these really varied characters. Duncan is just this fantastically lovable dope of a human. Dean manages to feel like the straight man of the group, but while still firmly being one of the lads. DJ Beetroot is so funny as this braggadocious, obnoxious, but secretly insecure teller of tall tales. And Ian is the perfect outsider to kind of act as the audience initial perspective in a really thematically interesting way that sort of gives not both him, but the people watching from his more normal viewpoint, an interesting arc that sees the loutish lads become more lovable through his eyes in a way that delivers that same discovery to the audience. The antagonists, Georgie Glenn as the Duchess and the national treasure comedian and activist Susie Izzard as the Duke, do brilliantly as these kind of electrically funny upper-class elitists, dripping with the kind of loathable, posh, stiff upper lip and theatricality that makes every line out of their definitely Tory voting mouths endlessly entertaining. And the sporting cast of Kevin Guthrie and Kate Dickey as the kind of bumbling police officers, as well as Jonathan Arris as their teacher Mr. Carlyle, and legendary actor James Cosmo as a local farmer who gets involved with it all, really flesh out the story with a good level of interwoven and enjoyable plot lines that consistently add fresh new stakes and make for some great comedy. And if you watch Get Duked as just a fun comedy horror, turn your brain off and let the laughs roll in, you'll have a great time, but it has so much more meat on its bones than just that. For starters, the film has a crazy well-realised visual style. It's bursting with so much gorgeous cinematography and anarchic, creative energy that it really becomes, for a fun, silly film about posh people hunting chavs in the Scottish Highlands, a genuinely cinematic endeavour. It's full of excellent visual storytelling, the fantastically stylized montages of the boys' misdemeanors that introduces them, each of which plays out like a sort of punky, flashy, Usual Suspects-esque police lineup, all the wild tripping scenes which create all these crazy drug-fueled effects that are a sight to behold, and there's even an incredible music video sequence that isn't just brilliantly entertaining a scene all on its own, but also craftily ties together all these narrative threads the film is juggling as it goes into its third act. In more of the cinematography department, there's some really fantastic creative decisions made. The film can be visually stunning. There are these huge wide aerial shots in this thing of the lads making their way through the Scottish Highlands that, I'm not even kidding, are legitimately reminiscent of Peter Jackson's large-scale approach to cinematography on his Lord of the Rings trilogy. And in terms of how things are shot, there's lots of real clear intention behind how the team approach their cinematography with regards to the story. In the initial encounters with the Duke and Duchess, when the boys aren't quite as firmly held together a unit, we see the Duke and Duchess shot in these composed static shots shots, or with clean tracking movement, whereas the boys get these hectic, more handheld camera visuals. As the narrative control switches between the group though, and the boys start to fight back, we see that reversed. The lads now having the controlled camera movement, while the Duchess and Duke have this more frenetic style. The direction is really something special when you watch it. The set pieces absolutely pop off the screen with irreverence, colour, style and humour. And all of these visuals pair perfectly with a carefully curated soundtrack that is just magnificent. It's a phenomenally well made film in a technical sense, effortlessly dancing the line between fun comedy and genuinely thrilling horror. There's a spectacle and level of high tension stakes to all of its major encounters that's never undermined by its tongue-in-cheek tone, and that is such a difficult balancing act to pull off, and the thing where most horror comedies tend to miss the mark. But this film does it like it's easy. However, perhaps what's more interesting is its narrative themes. I mentioned earlier that the idea of a chav is kind of tied in with the demonisation of the British working class and exists primarily not as a truly functional descriptor of actual individuals within society, but more as just a kind of catch-all label to write someone off with. The main lads of Get Duked are introduced to us, for all intents and purposes, as being chavs. They're loutish, they're troublemakers, they take drugs and do daft stupid shit like blow up school toilets. One of them brags about cursing out his teacher even though he really didn't and was too scared to. And we mostly only have the perspective of Ian to view them through as a non-antagonistic force through most of the film's runtime. Because he sees them as disappointments, we're kind of meant to feel bad for him, for having to be bundled with this gang of hooligans who aren't taking him seriously. They're the kind of kids that bully kids like Ian, and he sort of feels a little bullied, because this means a lot to him and they're just kind of resentfully there, messing about when it matters so much to the lad and doing illicit substances and stuff and not really having much of a brain cell to share between them. But as the film goes on, the narrative starts to slowly chip away at that image and breaks down our own assumptions. It really fleshes these boys out as being kids, but not bad kids. Yeah, they're daft and silly and do things that are frowned upon, but they're also loyal and kinda sweet. And just because they're not bright in the academic sense doesn't somehow mean they're awful people. They're just kids. Just daft lads. It's not even like they aren't shown to be resourceful and driven. DJ Beetroot genuinely cares about his music, regardless of how ridiculous others perceive it. And throughout the story, they're all shown to be smarter than you'd think, utilising tools in creative and unorthodox ways to defend against their attackers. There's a fantastic moment at the midpoint where Dean is kind of baffled that Ian considers himself on the outside of their group. Ian just assumed these lads hated him, found him annoying, wanted now to do with him. Whereas on Dean, Duncan and Beetroot's side of things, that wasn't even something they considered. It genuinely takes Dean by surprise that Ian would assume they think so low of him. As far as they're concerned, he might be a nerd, but he's just a canny lad. And it only sort of occurs to you at that point in the movie, these boys haven't been mean to Ian this whole film. You just sort of assumed that they were, because Ian kinda did. It's a low-key, mind-blowing revelation told through such a small and intimate moment of conversation that seriously gets you to reflect upon how you've examined and perceived these characters. Chav is such a negative label, and I've always thought of it as being one too, just because of the culture around it. But I went to school with plenty of people who'd be considered chavs, and they were dead canny. Aye, there was a bunch of bastards too, but their manner of speaking, interests in drinking and fashion sense was not the qualities that united them. Just some were arseholes and some really weren't. I once got spat on in school by a proper scummy bully I'd never even interacted with before, just while I was passing him, and while his mates laughed, another chav who had absolutely no relationship with me, got right in his face and defended me, screaming, "Fuck do you think you're doing, you rotten little rat? Eh? Think you're hard, eh? I'll fucking hoggle in your fucking face, see how you like it. Can't say sorry now or I'll knock you out." Kid was working class, rough as a badger's arse, drank like a sailor at the age of 13, but he was a good lad, and he saw something unfair happen, and he stepped in to stop it. I think he might actually be a good dad now and all, if I'm not mistaken. Equally, there were kids in my school who weren't chavs, who were arseholes too. Get Duked is all about using the vehicle of a hilarious British-tinged horror comedy to really explore this archetype and what it means to be labelled as a chav. It's a thematic thread that's richly laid throughout and develops into discussions on classism and privilege, economic imbalances between the 1% and everybody else, and the kind of older generation versus younger generation culture war that manifests from these issues of people perceiving a sense of entitlement in others where there may not even be one. You probably won't be surprised to hear that one of the main motives of the killers is just that they are rich people who like to hunt puas for fun. And they often get away with this act because, well, of course they do. That's kind of the whole theme of the film. People don't care about these kids because they're just poor, average kids. As far as the killers see it, they're doing the world a favour, wiping another entitled leech out of society. The killers represent a kind of wealthy elite worldview. It's no accident, after all, that they're literally named and modelled after the Duke of Edinburgh, a figure who is perpetually one of the richest, most privileged people in the country since like the 1700s when the title was founded. The final act in particular makes for an extremely satisfying payoff to these ideas, with a truly wonderfully written war of words between these two ideologies that peaks with a fantastically cathartic monologue from one of the boys that really communicates why exactly people like them are the way they are. Because in essence, many people like them sort of never had the chance to be seen as anything else. A scene which is followed by the equally fist-pumping moment of one of the greatest payoffs to a clever earlier setup you could possibly have. That's something this film is just absolutely jam-packed with. Everything in the film is clearly foreshadowed or set up to deliver the best possible punchline and most rewarding scenes further down the line in this incredibly well-crafted script. The whole thing feels like such a product of passion, and when you see behind the scenes, that seems to absolutely be the case. The boys on set seem just as friendly daft lads as they do in the movie, and Ninian and the cast and the crew talk joyously about their work together. I really wanted to ask Ninian what it was like to work on a shoot that seemed to have such good energy and everybody in total sync, fully understanding what it was they were making, and how we went about creating such a daft, enjoyable comedy horror while still so seamlessly weaving culturally relevant thematic threads throughout the story without losing sight of either aspect. So I did. Please welcome to the channel Mr. Ninian Doff. Hey Ninian, welcome to the channel.
Hello, thanks for having me.
I suppose the first question I want to get before we talk about anything else is, did you do the dreaded Duke of Edinburgh?
Yeah, so I did the Duke of Edinburgh Award till silver, bronze, silver, gold. I did the silver expedition, and what I always enjoyed, I actually loved the walking bit, which is the film. Ironically, because the kids are like, "What the hell fuck is this?" Like, I really liked that because it was and obviously the film's not autobiographical in that we never got hunted, but it is autobiographical. We're fucking inept.
So one thing I really love about Get Duked, like, it's a very, very working class story. We're seeing these kids as kind of useless, do-nothing chavs, and then you slowly break down that archetype over the course of the film.
Yeah, no, I mean, really nicely observed, and especially on Ian's sort of perspective being everyone's, and you sort of shifting on it. And I think it's a mix of everything you said. So I think one thing is like the genesis of the film was what was sort of and which is why it's quite interesting. Like you say, it's purposefully quite tropey to begin with. It's a tricky thing playing trope. You're sort of purposely playing that slightly to then grow in it or subvert it slightly and all that. But I was slightly playing in that I wanted to be a bit genre because I was like the blank page that equaled the first scribbled ideas for this film was that I wanted to do a revenge movie of like the current generation on the current young generation on the older generation, a generational revenge as such. And
and
I wanted, it was written absolutely in the wake of like Brexit and Trump and all those things, and I was like, I don't want to write like, why do political films have to be hard work? Like, no offense to Ken Loach, who's made amazing films, but you're not like, oh, let's put on this Ken Loach film on a Friday night with my mates, right? And I was like, so I had this big thing of like, wouldn't it be amazing if you could make a political film that was like really quotable and you'd watch it 5 times and you'd watch it like drunk after the pub with your friends, but it actually was a political movie. Really early on, day one, the first scene we shot of the film is when they're in the long grass trying to roll a joint, and Ryan Gordon, who plays Dean, he says to Ian, he's like, come on, we're a team, we're a fucking gang. And he said that, and I was like, my heart exploded, and I was like, we're a fucking gang. I was like, that's the greatest thing you ever want anyone to say to you. You're a teenager, you know what I mean? You're in.
Yeah, man.
And it was so beautiful, and I was like, said cut. It was genuinely like hour one, and it was like, that whenever it goes off course, that's what has to be brought right back to, and that's how we're gonna like stay on love, stay with these characters and ride them right through all the madness.
Last thing, I know you've kind of pulled yourself off Instagram, but is there anywhere people can like kind of follow you and keep up to date with you, that so in case they want to like catch on your projects? Or
yeah, I have kind of I've stopped posting on Instagram just because it was annoying me, but and actually all of it, I'm becoming increasingly a weird recluse. Unfortunately, I've not tweeted or Instagrammed in a long time, but maybe when something appears, I'll force myself to post something that's worthwhile just for you and people who are watching this. If something comes out, that'll be it. It'll be
appreciate it.
But yeah,
appreciate it. Go check this guy out. Check out Get Duked. Follow him. He posts very little, but when he does post, it's going to be a banger because it's going to be his next project. And I, for one, can't wait to see what he does. So go check him out. Thank you so much, Ninian, for being a part of this project. You can catch my full conversation with him on my Patreon, where we went a lot more in depth on the film, its themes, and just filmmaking in general. And I think that is probably about as good a time to wrap this one up as any. So with another episode of this celebration of horror in the bag, let me just remind you before we finish that this whole month of videos is being done in aid of Trans Lifeline, with 100% of every donation taken from the donate buttons you can find on the video pages, as well as my Patreon income for the month and any profits from this lovely shirt I'm selling, and ad revenue will go directly to the charity, which provides direct emotional and financial support to trans people in crisis. So if you're able to, please donate at the donation button or pick up a shirt at the link in the description. Also, as a quick reminder, in non-charity news, I've got a few other cool things you might be interested in. Firstly, this one's a favour to ask. I may, at the point that this video goes live, still be in the running to be the 2023 Face of Horror, and if you could all vote for me on that would be super appreciated. You get a free vote every 24 hours, and if you feel so inclined, you can actually buy more votes, and should you do so, you'll be supporting the B+ Foundation, which is a charity that seeks to fight childhood cancer. And finally, some of you may know that I've actually become a creative advisor on a massive major horror franchise, In Search of Darkness. This was a trilogy of huge, critically acclaimed Fangoria Award nominated mega documentaries currently streaming on Shudder, exploring the history of 80s horror movies, and they are about to follow up with their first foray into the era of the 90s with In Search of Darkness 90 to 94. And as a creative advisor on that doc, I am able to offer you a 10% discount on purchase of it at the campaign that is currently running to tell them all Dan Drambles sent you. Link and discount code in the description below. Other than that, you all know the drill. Please like the video if you liked it, comment with your thoughts, subscribe to my OnlyDans at the red button below, and hit that bell so you don't miss another upload. And with that, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 3, a celebration of horror, and I will see you again tomorrow.